I talk with a lot of coaches, and one of the things that I continually hear is that I struggle to get in front of my ideal client. Most of them have it really easy. Imagine if you lived on an island, and on that island, your community had 1,500 people. Now, you serve a very tight niche of people. How are you going to do that? Today, you can find out. Sarah Greener is going to sit down with our own Louise Buckley and talk about how she used podcasts to position herself as a thought leading coach and drive business, even though she's in a small community in New Zealand. If Sarah can do it, you can do it too. You see, there's a lot of problems in the world today, but there is no better time to be alive. The world is your customer base. You just need to find a way to get in front of them and stop trying to break through the noise. Better to get in on the conversation they're already listening to, just like Sarah did.
Thank you, Tom. And Sarah, can you share a bit about your personal career journey and then how you got into podcast interview marketing from there?
I never look at it as like a career because obviously I'm in business. So everyone's like, talk to us about your career. And I think I haven't had one of those. I am now a full-time business coach in my own company called the Moxie Movement. But since I've been very young, just been in business, family business. And then when I was 25, my husband and I moved back from Thailand and bought a tourism business here in the Bay of Islands. And it started from there. We still have that business. We've been through some other businesses that we've bought and sold. Got into podcasting because while I live in a really beautiful place, it's a long way from anywhere. So I come all the way from the Bay of Islands in New Zealand, which is not quite at the top of New Zealand, but close. And my town has the sum total of 1,800 people in it. And so for me, getting into podcast guesting was a way of getting on stages without having to travel huge distances and raise my profile a little.
Excellent. Yeah. And like that, you want to make sure that if you're doing a travel, it's for more than a 30-minute interview. You want it to be for a couple of different events. So,
oh, absolutely. There's no short trips from New Zealand.
So, can you share a bit about your experience with podcast interviews and any particularly memorable moments that stood out for you?
So I think I started off doing it on my own. So where people would just reach out and say, hey, are you interested? And I would jump on. There was no strategy. There was no logical thought behind, is this aligned? Is this somewhere we could collaborate further? Versus as I got further down the journey and I worked with Interview Valet, we were far more strategic about it. So we got really, really clear on who my ideal client was. And then we started looking for podcasts that were aligned with that. So that weren't in direct competition, but were aligned in the stories that we were talking about and the way that that worked. And so when we first started doing it on our own, it was really overwhelming because there's like so many moving pieces and you might record the podcast interview episode months, maybe even a year before it goes live. And so kind of managing the flow of information and making sure that you are making the most out of the opportunity is something that was really important. So that's, once we got those systems sorted for us internally and obviously working with someone that had good systems on the other side, it made that far easier for us. Memorable moments, God. I don't think of any. There was definitely some incredible people that I met on the journey. So people I would never have met. So again, like that distance thing for me, being all the way down in New Zealand, it was the ability to collaborate with people all over the world that I never would have met, who I got on with super well with. Some of them I stayed in contact with and built really cool relationships. Angie Cooley was probably one of them that I really enjoyed our conversation. And then hilariously, we had mutual other friends through business as well, which was super funny. So we had a great chat. I really enjoyed, particularly there are some podcast hosts who have gone out of their way to be different. And so they have different questions. They make you think, even, I've been doing this for a long time, they would make me think about my perspective on business differently, or ask a question where I was like, oh, I've never been asked that one before. And it was a great way to kind of add insight and add depth to the conversations that you were having.
How have you navigated when they've asked you a question that kind of catches you off guard and you're like, oh, haven't thought about that before?
Yeah, so that's my jam. I love being in a place where I'm like, oh, that's a new way of thinking about it, and processing the information and looking at it. I think anyone that knows they've got questions that is something a bit left field or a bit different, not your average podcast question, I guess, they would forward those in advance, so that you've got a moment to think about them beforehand, which is useful. And I guess the other thing is, when I don't know the answer to a question, like, I'm just going to say I don't know. Like, if it's how I think about something, I'm happy to answer. But if it's just something I just don't have the knowledge on, or I can say I don't know. I don't have to have a view on everything. And I think, knowing, for the most part, I did a couple of live podcasts, but other than that, they were all recorded and edited. So you know that if you stumble, things can be fixed afterwards.
Fix it in post.
Yeah. Probably not what the producer wants to hear, but that's okay.
I studied film. You'll hear it in every creative and media format. So, and I know when you were working with us, you had a really, really great system in place to make sure that you were prepared for each of your podcasts. So can you talk us through a little bit your step-by-step to make sure that you were ready and prepared, and that you knew exactly what you wanted to say going into your shows?
Yeah, so we got delivered with information about these people that were podcasts. So what does the podcast show, podcast host? And so we would make sure that we connected with them all. And when I say we, that's the royal we. This is a not Sarah job. So I have an awesome team that helps me, very small but amazing team. So we'd connect with everyone on all the socials. I'd make sure that I'd followed a little bit, read a little bit of their stuff, gone through all the podcast information, listened to an episode at least before I got on board. So there was kind of there was a system, basically, the behind the scenes that we went through and ticked off of, here's all the ways that we want to engage with the host in the podcast beforehand. Here's the information that we want to have gathered beforehand, and made sure that we'd kind of done that work. I think the thing for me, because when you start guesting, you feel like you're saying the same thing over and over again, and you're talking to a different audience, but it starts to feel repetitive. And so looking for an angle of my stuff and what I'm the expert in and what I talk about, and looking for the angle that aligns with what they're doing, and spending some time thinking and putting some notes down around that. And then really just waiting and allowing the conversation to be as natural as possible. So like little things that I learned to ask for is that I'm far more natural if I can see your face. I find the podcasts that were no faces, where I'm just talking to a blank screen, it feels stilted. So I got into the habit of saying, oh, yeah, I want to have that. I got good at making sure. So in the early days, I used to like bring 2 giant bean bags in from outside and put them in the room to fix the acoustics for certain people. Like, it was just, figured those things out on the fly. And then the second part of that was what we did with the episodes once they came out. But we wanted to make sure that we were saying thank you. We wanted to send a thank you after we'd been on the podcast. So I've got a client who makes craft chocolate, so we would send New Zealand craft chocolate. Bonus, supports the client and gets their product all out over the world as well.
Literally keeping the host sweet. And
Yeah, you got it.
and like that, when you build that, you're taking the time to build that rapport, sending them a little sweet gift. It's not only showing that you're working with them collaboratively, but that you appreciate them, and they're like more likely to promote your episode more and take the time to put that more effort in for you. So that's the sending chocolates. I love that idea. That's really, really nice. And as you said, you're supporting a local business as well, so really lovely. Was there any kind of situations where the host asked you something like particularly awkward, or um, just kind of started to steer the conversation in a way that wasn't ideal for you or aligned with your brand? And if so, how did you kind of steer it back to a place that you felt more comfortable?
No, I've never, no, I just didn't. I didn't have anyone. Everyone was genuinely lovely. There was definitely none of those conversations where you felt like they were like trying to catch you out. And yeah, I mean, potentially that's because I don't have much that I'm not comfortable talking about. I talk about all my dumb bits in business, and so that's the lessons. Those are the things that are valuable. That's the reason I can do what I do, because I'm not just sharing the bits that are good. I've been in business for nearly 20 years, and so there's definitely some dumb stuff I've done, and so maybe that's the reason none of it was awkward, because I'm like, I'm really just talking about the dumb stuff I've done. I'm here, like, here, don't do this. This is way better. Yeah, so no, I didn't have that experience.
And it's very rare, but it is. It can be something that you have to kind of work around and try and guide the conversation the way you want to go.
Yeah, I think that's the difference between having something that's strategically thought through versus someone invites you and you just go on it because you've been invited. Oh, my friend invited me, so I'll go and do that, versus this is what your business is about. This is who you want to talk to. Here are the messages that you want to get across, and strategically thinking about that. And so because there's this alignment but not competition, there's a really easy way to have those conversations.
Definitely. And how did you, when you were working with your team before you started getting on podcasts, or when you started thinking about it more strategically, how did you narrow down who exactly you wanted as your target audience?
So I guess it was more about my business than about the podcast interviewing. And I've been doing this for 8 years now. And when I started business coaching, it was like, I coach everybody because that's how business starts, right? And over time, it's been narrowed down to I work with women in business that are also mums and wives and are looking to go from this, overwhelmed, overworked, underpaid kind of vibe into a place where they are defying the statistics of women in business and making more money. And I don't mean sales, I mean profit and salary, and still able to be home for dinner and not having to miss out on things like school camp and those things. Because most women, as general rule, don't get in business for the money to go, I've made $1 million. They get into business to create freedom and flexibility and to make an impact. And so when you're really clear on who it is you're talking to, and then of course there's all the demographics that come with that they are generally female and they are of a certain age and they have children and they have dependents. So there's all the demographics that when you're really clear about that in your business, it makes everything else easier. So it makes marketing easier, sales easier, building your systems easier, and it makes podcast guesting interviews easier because you go, hey, this is who she wants to talk to. Let's find aligned podcast hosts to make that happen.
Speaking of being like you're working mostly with busy mums and busy women in general, have you found that podcast marketing or podcast guesting has been a good way to market your business while fitting it in around your massively busy schedule that is?
Yeah, so there are a little again, live in New Zealand, so time zones are a thing when you're working. So most of the podcasts were not based, in fact, I don't think I went on one that was based in New Zealand, which is great because that was kind of the thing that we were looking for. So yeah, it absolutely fitting around. There was a few that I had to get up and do before we got children up to school and things like that, but it's as a general rule, it fit around really well for me. And then the flip side of that has been it clearly fits for my ideal client because I would say, how did you hear about it? I was, I heard you on so-and-so's podcast. I was looking for your podcast. I was like, I don't have one. Like so much so. I got that so much so I now have one because I just was like, this is crazy that, they clearly like the ability to listen in these short bite-sized pieces to stuff that's valuable to their lives and their business, and I'm not doing it. And so it was a great next step for me. to figure out that worked well for my clients.
And I'm sure it's like that with your ideal clients. They can listen while they're doing the school run. You know, they can listen to podcasts while they're on the 20-minute commute to drop the kids off.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's all the other things that women do that, you know, I really advocate that we don't do anymore, but the cleaning and the cooking and the laundry and there's so many tasks that have to be done just to maintain their status quo that's the place where they're listening to their podcasts. And previously they might have mindlessly watched TV. Now they're looking to improve their lives. It's a super interesting tool for them to do that.
As a TV in the background girly, but then I realized that I kept looking at the screen and sitting down and not getting anything done. Whereas if you have a podcast, you're not necessarily watching the screen because it's more about the audio content that you've got and the quality of the content. So you can still keep pottering around and doing whatever. Sometimes even we just listen to podcasts, myself and my partner, while chilling out. Could be, you know, doing anything or nothing. Just lying.
Yeah, and so interesting for us, like I listen to podcasts with Scarlett. Like it might not be, you know, necessarily relevant with her, but it's, you know, she listens and she takes what she needs from it in that moment. Our girl's only 11 and she's got so much good stuff out of listening to all sorts of random podcasts. So, you know, it's also something you can do with the kids that's, you know, appropriate.
We've talked a little bit about strategy that you and your team have set up for preparing for podcasts. Let's talk about promotion now. So what ways are what were your key takeaways for promoting episodes both before it airs and after?
Yeah, so the work's not done when you're recording the episode, and I think that's the thing that we had to figure out was that, like I said, there's this big time lag and there's this work that you do up front to prepare and to make sure you're connected and you're well informed and you do a great job of showing up and supporting the podcast host and supporting your brand. And then afterwards, there's also this piece around, okay, well, now it's live, or you know it's going to go live next week or whatever. How are you going to make sure that it gets listened to? Because it's all well and good, build it, but it's not build it and they will come. You actually have to tell people it exists. And so we got to a place where we had a system of, so when we would get notified, so some podcast hosts would let you know with plenty of warning, others would be like, oh yeah, by the way, it's live. So you just had to kind of roll with that. So we, as much as possible, we wanted to know in advance because we would create social media posts or audiograms. We would upload the links to the podcast episode on a dedicated web page. We would, what else did we do? We would send out an email to our database to say it was going live. So we'd do we would promote across the board to all of our social networks and our database, and then share. And so anything that we then got shared by the host, I'm muddling my words, sorry. Anything that the host then shared, we would then on share with other people. And so kind of engage with their social posts and have a little bit of banter and a little bit of, you know, calling out key moments on the podcast and chats, you know, and comments below, which was really useful. And then we made sure that we had all the files and everything kept for later on promotion. So if we were ever talking about a topic again, it was relevant, we could repost it. So that was really useful to know that it was going to go across all of our socials seamlessly without me having to do too much work, which was great.
Like that you've mentioned repurposing. Is there any kind of guidelines you'd suggest for how often you should repurpose material, or is it more about where your business is at any given time?
Repurpose as much as possible. Like I am so bored of saying the same freaking messages over and over again, and yet 99% of your audience hasn't heard it yet. And I think that's true of all marketing. And that's why when you're guesting, I'm like, oh, I'm going to get on and say the same thing again. But fundamentally, they haven't heard you before. They don't, you know, like the rational reason for going and podcast guesting is that you get on other people's stages and you get exposure to their audiences. And the reason you're doing that is because not enough people know who you are yet. And then you don't use the stuff often enough, more and more. And so like, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm like, oh, we've got all those banked interviews. I'm like, what have we done with them? And so we would probably now go back through them and take more snippets and put them over, like, there's different things that are trendy now in terms of reels and shorts and things like that. And so we could take snippets of audio and just layer them over a short, video of some trees blowing or something. Like, it's repurpose. Like, you could use the same bit of audio 1,000 different ways, and 99.9% of people will never notice. You'll be bored of it, but no one else will.
And there's never anybody who's more bored of hearing a voice than themselves. It's all. And you mentioned like getting tired of saying the same thing over and over. What advice would you give to somebody who is getting into podcast guesting for the first time, about how they schedule their interviews and kind of timings?
Yeah, so I think I had some weeks where I had stacked like 3 or 4 or up. Don't do that. Like, if you're doing one interview a week, like consistently throughout the year, like that's a really nice way to do it. I mean, obviously, if you've got a launch or something, there's different strategies around that. But if you're consistently, sustainably building a business, doing one interview a week for the next year is probably a really nice way to do it, rather than do 5 every week for the next 10 weeks, which is when you're going to be like, oh, I'm saying the same thing. And you've also got to remember that you progress as a person. You grow, you develop, you evolve. And so that I'm going to look back at those guest spots that I did 12 months ago, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and go, oh, cringe. I've got far greater insight, the ability to articulate those concepts better now than I did back then. And so it's going to be an evolution. And the more conversations you have, the greater depth of insight and evolution you have. Because you're not podcasting with people that are stupid. Like, these guys add value and add insight to the conversation as well. And so it is going to deepen your message and deepen your understanding of your own topic just going through the process. It requires you to do thinking, and any time that you're spending time doing deliberate thinking about your business and the messaging and the problem that you solve is going to be time well spent.
And do you think podcast guesting has helped your coaching style?
I'm not sure about that one. I've evolved so much as a human. I don't know that I could pinpoint anything. It's definitely been part of the journey. I think it's probably slowed me down. So I don't know if you noticed, but I talk very quickly. I have a reasonably strong New Zealand accent. And so because I did a lot of the guesting overseas, I learned to slow down, use less words, be more deliberate with my communication. And that's got to be valuable in my coaching world, especially as my business obviously expands to include clients from elsewhere in the world, not just New Zealand, which is what it's done over the last few years.
When you've got hosts that send you like a list of questions, do you find that kind of stagnates you, or do you take that as a challenge to bring the conversation and expand the conversation through your answers?
I like it because it allows me to have a little insight. I've had very few, maybe 1 or 2 podcast hosts that have literally read through a script. For the most part, they give you a framework, I think mostly to stop you freaking out and worrying about the fact that, oh God, where's this conversation to go? And it's like, you have conversations every day, like just go and have a conversation. And so I love talking business. And so talking business with other smart businesswomen and men, like I could do that all day, every day. And so for most people that are going to be doing podcast guesting, I suspect whatever topic it is that you're talking about, you're going to feel very comfortable having those conversations and chatting with people about it. And the conversation will go naturally in other places than just what they've seen, because they're coming in as with just as much of a blank page as you are. They don't know what your answers are going to be. They might have done a little bit of research. They might have read some stuff that you've written or watched a video of you talking, but they don't, you don't answer it the same way every time perfectly word for word. And so you're both coming in it with a element of unknown, and that's a good thing, I think, to take the conversation. So I've never felt, there was a couple of times I was like, okay, we're following a script, but they were generally quite early on in their podcasting experience. And I was like, cool, like they're just getting started. I'm all for people learning and expanding. And then there were people that had clearly done thousands of episodes who just riffed on stuff and had quirky alternative questions and themes that they wanted to go down that were aligned for their audience. That was really valuable.
So I'm going to start to wrap up, Sarah. And how can our listeners find you? Where can they find you?
So probably the easiest place to find me is themoxiemovement.com, which is the website, or you can find me on Instagram at Sarah Greener Coach.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sarah.
My pleasure.
That was inspiring. I love how Sarah found a marketing channel that's consistent with who she is, right? Her authenticity comes through. There's a lot of ways to market today, but you've got to find which one works for your values, for your voice, and for your lifestyle. See, Sarah can't jump on a plane from New Zealand and go to all the conferences or speak at all the events that her ideal clients are at. But that doesn't mean that she can't get hurt by them. She figured out how to market in a way that was easy and effective for her and easy and effective for her clients. Think about that. Is podcast interview marketing something you could use? If so, we would love to help you. We've got a lot of resources back at the Interview Valet website, or if you'd like to talk with any of our team, just go back to interviewvalet.com.